Good evening and very warm welcome to you all to this joint lecture between the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. These are now an annual event for the two societies coming together to interest a wider audience, and we have a very good audience this evening coming from all sorts of different disciplines in the interface between science and technology and engineering, which the Royal Society of Edinburgh considers to be very important indeed. We're very lucky this evening to have as our speaker Dr. Ian Stevens, who is the Chief Executive of biotechnology, bioengineering company Touch Bionics. And Ian has been associated with this aspect of engineering for some time and has actually taken part, as I think he will tell you in the lecture, in several different companies, at least 3 companies, which are biomedical device-led companies. This latest one is to do with the artificial hand, which will be extremely interesting, but he has worked on other body systems as well. And we look forward to an interesting lecture and an even more or as interesting discussion afterwards. So Ian, would you want to start? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir John. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've been very much looking forward to being here tonight at the Royal Society of Edinburgh to discuss with you the path to market and beyond for 3 elegant technologies. Technologies which were conceived by 3 very brave and visionary inventors and business founders, and with which I've been fortunate enough to be associated over the last 15 years or so. My name is Ian Stevens. I was born in Belfast in 1963 and educated at the city's Royal Academy and subsequently at Edinburgh University studying economics, graduating in 1985. And after university I spent 6 years in the Royal Air Force. Supposedly I was working as a systems analyst, but actually I was playing full-time rugby for the Air Force and for London Irish. And that was fun. But my wife, Ali, eventually reminded me that rugby was still an amateur sport and I needed to get a real job. So I joined KPMG. I trained, qualified and worked as a chartered accountant in Oxford and Prague, and I ended up back in Edinburgh in 1998. Now, in business, as in our day-to-day lives, huge consequences can and do often ensue from a series of sometimes just a small number of key decisions. Those may be about which market to choose, which strategy to follow, which person or persons to employ or collaborate with. But my aim tonight is to illustrate some of the key decisions surrounding the introduction and growth of the Optomap retinal exam from Optos, of Smartmesh for pelvic floor restoration from Mpathy Medical, and of the iLim bionic hand from Touch Bionics. I'm going to discuss the impact of those decisions on the engineering development of the products, especially in relation to their physical appearance, their range of functionality, and where appropriate in the software and mechanical interfaces used to control them. I will try to show you how those technologies were and are being adapted to meet their users' needs, first to survive and then to flourish as a business. But my key career decision came in that summer of 1998 when I quit my new finance job in a new shiny office with one of Scotland's largest private companies 2 days before I was due to start it. Instead, I went to work at Optos with Douglas Anderson in a cold, damp portakabin in Dunfermline. I'd met Douglas a few months earlier and he had shared with me the Optos fledgling business plan. At that time, the company had made 1 prototype imaging system. There were 10 or so mainly research and development staff, and there was absolutely no sign of any revenue. And I've been working in corporate finance, and part of my job was to look at the business plans of young companies seeking equity funding. The Optos business plan was the most compelling one that I'd ever seen. A massive unmet need combined with clear intellectual property and a technology which was complicated, possible to manufacture, but very difficult to copy. Ali encouraged me, again, to avoid spending the rest of my working career saying, if only, and leap onto the Optos roller coaster. You're probably thinking at this point, can this man actually make a decision for himself? But I was to get plenty of opportunity. Now, Optos was founded because Douglas's young son Leif was unfortunate enough to suffer from retinal detachments. These left him blind in one eye and with reduced vision in the other. Douglas was determined that other patients and parents would not have to go through what he and Leif did. Here's how he described the situation.
Douglas Anderson's son Leif went blind in his left eye at age 4 when a retinal detachment went undetected. The irony is that the boy had been undergoing regular eye exams because he was severely nearsighted.
There was no way that, as a parent, I could see what was going on. So I had to rely on the clinicians, the doctors' interpretation, his reassurance. And I could see the difficulty that he was having in the examination process. So when he reassured me, I wasn't reassured at all. The more he tried to reassure me, the more stressed I got. Because, and if I made an observation, he would say, well, you've got to understand, I'm only seeing a glimpse.
To help other families avoid a similar fate, Douglas Anderson spent 10 years perfecting the Optomap technology, taking the difficulty and guesswork out of retinal exams, both for children, who often have trouble sitting still, and adults alike.
It's very convenient, it's very fast, it's very patient-friendly, it's a great educational experience for the patient, and it provides documentation, a record for the patient's vision for their whole life.
The key words here are, I wasn't reassured at all. I'll come back to those words. You know, it's so much better to invent something which solves a known problem rather than stumble across an interesting technology and then say, well, that's interesting, what shall I do with it? And it took the third research team hired by Douglas to solve his problem. Here's the problem. To get an image of the retina, you have to shine light on it. And then you have to get that light back in and out of an opening, the pupil, which has a most annoying habit of constricting in those circumstances. Tricky. Douglas's third team pointed out to him that an ellipsoidal mirror has 2 focal points. So the solution to the problem was to place the eye at one of those focal points, fire a low-energy laser beam through the pupil onto the retina, and then place the collection device at the other focal point to collect that reflected energy. No time for the pupil to constrict, and no need for uncomfortable contact with the cornea. Obvious, eh? Well, the thing about clever inventions like this one is that they always seem obvious just after they've been invented. From an engineering point of view, there were still some significant issues to be solved, such as scanning that laser light around the entire surface of the inside of the retina. That required the use of a spinning polygon rotating at 27,356 revolutions per minute, exactly. And then there was the ergonomic requirement to position the eye of the patient in precisely the right position to get the laser beam through the pupil in the first place. And there were demanding manufacturing tolerances related to the performance and positioning of 15 or so mirrors and lenses to direct and collate that returning information. All doable, though. The bigger question was as yet unanswered. If we solve the technical problem, then, well, so what really? How do we get all this paid for? How do we make it a business? Back to those words then, I wasn't reassured at all. What Douglas was saying was that this skilled ophthalmologist had not, via his manual examination, obtained enough information to satisfactorily diagnose Leif's condition. If you remember, he'd admitted that he was only getting a glimpse. By inventing the Optomap technology, Douglas solved those 2 problems. Lots more information could be obtained, and it could all be recorded digitally so as to be there for immediate and future review and comparison, rather than accessible only via the practitioner's memory. But the equipment needed to do this was very, very expensive, tens of thousands for each device, even after manufacturing volume reductions. So how could a viable business be created? Well, the answer to this question is found in all of our desire to be reassured about our health. Conditions of or evident in the retina, like diabetic bleeding, like macular degeneration, like retinal detachment, like glaucoma, like high blood pressure, like ocular tumours. These conditions are often asymptomatic, but crucially can be detected at an early stage via regular and comprehensive examination of the retina. Essentially, when we have our annual eye check, we really want to be told one thing and one thing only. Mr. Stevens, you are fine. But we also want to have confidence that if we were not fine, then our doctor would indeed be able to identify any problems. Look at this image. At first glance, it's a normal, healthy retina. That's a retina. But with the Optomap, you can see out much wider. And lurking near the periphery of the retina is a retinal hole, the sort of thing that could cause a detachment of the retina and consequent blindness. That's what happened to Leaf. Wouldn't it be worth a small fee annually, say $15 or $20, to just check that there wasn't a problem like that present in your retina? I think so. So Optos decided very early on, before it ever earned a single dollar in revenue, that it would unlock the value in the reassurance opportunity. It decided to sell the Optomap image rather than the device itself. By renting the equipment on a pay-per-patient basis, the practitioner is encouraged to carry out as many screening exams as possible, since that generates revenue for his or her practice. The confidence of the patient in the value of that examination is built, and the Optomap is stored for future review and comparison. And Optos also developed software which facilitates an educational experience for the patient. The performance and usage levels of the practice are monitored daily so that proactive help and training can be given to those practitioners who are not being successful in getting all or most of their patients to have an annual exam. And Optos decided that it would do this mainly in the United States of America, where the medical side of optometry was already a service that patients were prepared to pay for, rather than in this country, for example, where we're generally not used to being asked to pay an extra fee. Subsequent engineering was directed towards enabling high usage levels, precise and easy image taking by the patient themselves, and modular equipment design. So, for example, the patient software, called V2, because the first one was called V1, was designed for minimum data input time and maximum educational opportunity, utilizing libraries of disease images for comparison and allowing zoom and pan to look at areas of interest in greater detail. So, for example, the alignment system was consistently refined so that the patient would know where they were exactly in the right position to get that laser beam through the pupil first time, saving time. So, for example, the system unit was modularized in order to extend the lifetime of the equipment. Rental contracts could be extended after the initial 3-year term expired without the need for expensive equipment replacement. So both the equipment and the software were evergreen. And all of this went alongside the necessary continuous improvements to the manufacturing processes. Tolerances were tightened, processes were refined, and Optos went from practically breaking a bottle of champagne over each system as it came off the manufacturing line and naming it, to being able to produce 60 or 70 per month. Now, these engineering policies allowed the stakeholders and the financial backers to feel confident in the future of the company. The shareholders could see the number of Optomaps and locations rising, thus justifying their investment. The bank providing the leasing finance for the equipment could see that each system was financially self-sufficient, i.e. the practitioner was selling enough Optomaps to cover the lease payments. And the investment bank, handling Optos' eventual IPO, could see that this revenue would continue well into the future without the need for expensive equipment replacement. There's so much more I could tell you, but I need to move on. So I'll conclude this short summary of my Optos learning. Optos raised its first invoice for $94.50. That's 6 Optomaps at $15.75 each, on the 31st of August 1999, and it floated on the London Stock Exchange 6.5 years later in February 2006 at a market capitalization of about $250 million, by which time revenue was up to $65 million annually, with about 3,000 locations selling Optomaps. And percentage renewal rates, that crucial factor, were in the high 90s, and they remain high today, and the company continues to grow, with revenue now heading towards $200 million annually. Here's the then president of the American Optometric Association in 2006 describing just how critical that early detection capability was for his patients.
We actually saved a guy's life. There was a gentleman that came in, he was 51 years old, no prior medical history or medications, that had noticed a drop in vision in one of his eyes and picked out a set of new glasses. And when I did the examination, I didn't find a problem with his vision as far as glasses go. He had a hypertensive crisis that was evident by his optometric retinal examination. We were able to show him his eyes, and by the time he got down to urgent care, his His blood pressure was 260 over 160. They called an ambulance and sent him to the hospital.
Dave Nelson remains a customer today, and at the time he was leading America's 35,000 optometrists. It tended to be the case that once a customer had this sort of experience, then they would never give the equipment back. They were there for the long run. Of course, they were making significant revenue from the sales of the Optomap exam, so that helped as well. My final comment relating to Optos was that it was the proximity and regular contact of staff with customers and patients which prompted huge amounts of feedback, driving the direction of further hardware and software development. Optos built a direct sales force and had many clinical consultants constantly visiting and training locations throughout America. Since daily usage and performance data came from every single system, the company could act quickly to rectify any customer issues. And those were big lessons for me. I'd moved to the USA in 2003 as general manager, and I stayed for a year after the float to keep the growth going, but Ali and the kids had headed back to Scotland in 2006 for schooling reasons. So in April 2007 I left Optos, and a couple of months later I was lucky enough to meet another brave and visionary inventor. James Brining is a consultant gynecological surgeon who left his hospital post and joined Ethicon, a division of Johnson & Johnson, in the mid-1990s. At the time, Ethicon were introducing a new surgical product for women's health, and James was recruited to lead the product development. Ethicon had adopted the polypropylene mesh used for male hernia repair, which by then was becoming the norm rather than repairing hernias using suture. It was planning to use the same mesh for pelvic floor prolapse in women, a condition often caused by old age, obesity, or following childbirth. Now, James was concerned that the hernia mesh was too heavy for the more delicate area it was now being asked to be effective in, and that problems would ensue when the body rejected this implantation. So in 2001, he quit his job and a secure future. He raised some money from Archangel and Scottish Enterprise, and he set about inventing a lighter, stronger mesh. And James did invent his mesh. He invented a way to promote much higher new tissue growth after implantation of the mesh. Here's a diagram of the material. Compared to Ethicon's mesh, there was much more space, or otherwise known as air, and the mesh strands consisted of individual fibres carefully woven together and with tiny distances separating them. So the A and the B, A being the air, B being the space between the strands. James knew the size of the tiny particles called macrophages and neutrophils, which are together responsible for new tissue growth. He believed that if the spaces between individual fibres making up the strands of the mesh could be restricted to approximately 100 microns, then this would create an ideal location for new tissue growth to commence. Since the spaces between the strands could now be bigger, there could be more air and less mesh per square metre. Mpathy's mesh was therefore patented at less than 19 grams per square metre, which was less than half the weight of leading competitors. But in clinical trials, this lighter mesh was also approximately 60% stronger. And there it is. Obvious. Well, the thing about clever inventions like this is they're always obvious just after they've been invented. Having come up with the idea and prototype, James and a couple of colleagues spent 6 years perfecting the material, literally by weaving mesh, protecting his intellectual property, testing the mesh in clinical trials, and obtaining the necessary CE marks and FDA approvals. But by 2007, he was out of money. The big competitors in the marketplace, billion-dollar companies like Covidien, Bard, Boston Scientific, American Medical Systems, they were happy with their less effective materials, and they didn't want to buy James's new technology. So time for Plan B. The first phase of the engineering was complete, but Plan B involved setting up a US corporation, branding the new company and the products as advanced and market-leading, and going head-to-head in a very focused way with these huge corporations. Mpathy Medical had a limited range of products, and it chose to sell, again, only in the US, to carefully targeted leading urologists and urogynecologists, with, again, a direct sales force so that feedback could be obtained. Just as it had with Optos, the business angel group Archangel agreed and funded this further business development, and were joined this time by Scottish Enterprise through their very effective Scottish Co-Investment Fund. And in early 2008, Mpathy launched a range of pelvic floor prolapse and stress urinary incontinence implantable medical devices, all manufactured in Prestwick, Scotland, from this new lightweight, physiologically compatible material called Smartmesh. Unusually for a product like this, at the time of final FDA approval and product launch, Mpathy had substantial and very positive clinical evidence relating to Smartmesh's efficacy. There was otherwise a general absence of favourable outcome data for polypropylene mesh used for this type of surgery. It appeared that James's reason for leaving Ethicon was correct. The other meshes were not performing well. But Smartmesh had achieved outstanding results in over 200 fully documented cases performed by respected surgeons before a single piece was sold. Mpathy had learned that in addition to Smartmesh's low density per square metre, there were other important success factors for this type of surgery, such as the surface area of mesh left in the body, the means of securing the mesh within the body, and the actual shape of the mesh in relation to the actual location of the prolapse. Doesn't it look? It looks light. Look at all that air. Very precisely manufactured and very strong. Historically, this type of surgery had typically involved, I kid you not, the surgeon popping down to the back of the operating theatre with a pair of scissors, needle and thread, and fashioning a bespoke device for that particular operation, with the patient already in the theatre under a general anaesthetic. Women were being cured of prolapse, but often suffering complications and rejection because of the intrusiveness of the heavy mesh. In bringing Smartmesh to US hospitals, Mpathy focused on a practical and time-saving approach for the surgeon. We customised the mesh, different shapes and different means of fixation. So A for anterior, Y for laparoscopic, P for posterior. The use of tiny staples for fixation. And my personal favourite, to anchor the mesh in the body, a product enhancement called SmartFix, pictured here, and sometimes described as tying a knot in the mesh and pulling it tight. I'll finish with Mpathy now. I've always found that talking about pelvic floor prolapse surgery is an excellent dinner party conversation stopper. Seriously though, advanced engineering, maybe this second phase wasn't, but it was absolutely necessary to be very in tune with what would be helpful to the busy surgeon, who could be doing many of these surgeries daily, and who absolutely wanted no complications or adverse events. It was major surgery, and reversal of the operation was very difficult. Anyway, over the next 2 years, the Mpathy products were very successful, and we so annoyed our huge competitors that one of them eventually sued us for alleged patent infringement, which is code for "we'd like to buy you so that we can use your technology to advance our business." And as a result, Mpathy was sold to the Danish wound management and male urology company Coloplast. With access to their wider distribution capability, product sales have been able to grow much faster, and outsourced manufacturing has stayed in Scotland. But my interest in surgical procedures just couldn't make the leap to penile implants, testicular prostheses and colostomy bags. So in March 2011, I was out of work again. Where to next? Well, next for me was the chance to work with the amazing invention that is the iLim hand, with the aim of bringing its benefits to as many suitable recipients as possible. I was again lucky enough to be associated with the best product in the world in its field, and again the challenge was and is to develop that product and its supporting organisation so as to encourage wide adoption. Our hands are truly amazing things. Consider the range of movement possible, the precision with which we can grasp objects, the sensory feedback from touching something, the assistance to our balance and positional awareness. We do take them for granted. Try this sometime, now if you like. Put your hand in your pocket and keep it there for even a few minutes. I think you'll see that your means of dealing with the world immediately changes significantly. Then imagine if that were permanent, and remember that everyone you meet would notice this, and many would form a view of you because you were different. Not necessarily because they were being malevolent, but just because we notice these things. So these are the right hands of Sergeant Leroy Petrie, who's wearing the ILM on the left, and President Barack Obama, who was awarding him the Congressional Medal of Honor for Bravery. It's unusual anyway, because normally it's a posthumous award. But Sergeant Petrie picked up a Taliban grenade in Afghanistan and threw it away from his unguarded colleagues. It exploded as he threw it and he lost his right hand. Sergeant Petrie didn't want to shake hands with the President's left hand. He didn't want to use a hook or a passive device. He wanted to use his ILM to shake the President's right hand properly by closing his prosthetic fingers in a controlled fashion, shaking hands, and then opening those fingers again. So how can an advanced prosthetic hand provide that conforming grip and dexterity? Well, invention, shrewd observation skills, and innovative engineering are required. I'd heard about Touch Bionics before 2011, of course. It would have been hard not to have been aware of David Gow's invention when the first ILMs came to market in 2007, because there was and is a lot of interest in these types of inventions, especially in prosthetics. I didn't know anything about the detailed history, though. I didn't know, for example, that the roots of the Touch Bionics project went back to the early 60s and to the tragedy that was thalidomide. And that project had evolved over many development teams, many twists and turns, and it eventually brought to patients who'd suffered upper limb loss a multi-articulating, variably gripping, self-esteem elevating prosthetic hand. And certainly, basic electric hands had been around for decades. They were claw-like in appearance, they were very strong in their grip, but their digits lacked the ability to conform around an object, to grip with sufficient force, and to independently articulate. And those features are all necessary to truly confer to the user a significant restoration of their ability to perform a wide range of the activities of everyday living. So one day in the late 1980s, I hope I got this right, David Gow, an engineer working for the Scottish NHS, was working out on his wife's exercise bicycle. He noticed that the speedometer on the bicycle was loose, and that the mechanism that transmitted the speed reading was going round and round instead of being fixed, and that it had a particular combination of gearing called a worm wheel inside it. In doing so, he discovered a solution to the manufacture of those pesky prosthetic digits, which he'd been trying to perfect for the last 10 years or so. Another very useful invention, obvious after it was invented, seeking to solve a known problem. And it was that problem-resolving discovery which allowed David to continue his research work, inserting a small motor into each digit, and thus achieving sufficient grip strength combined with miniaturization. And that advance eventually allowed him to found Touch Bionics just over 10 years ago, again by obtaining investment from Archangel and Scottish Enterprise. Now, the Royal Society last heard about the ILM 4 years ago. At that time, Touch Bionics had just introduced its prosthetic digits in the form of a full hand called the ILM hand, and also a solution for patients with partial hand loss called ILM digits. At that time, about 500 patients had been fitted. But I want to take a little more time to describe where Touch Bionics finds itself today, now that over 4,000 patients have been fitted with ILMs. This is the third generation of ILM. It's called the ILM Ultra. I'd like to describe the reasoning behind some of the most recent engineering enhancements to further improve it. And finally, I'd like to look forward to what might be coming next and why. But first of all, let's hear from the founder. What was he seeking to achieve, and how much progress does he think has been made? Here is David in a recent CNN interview.
We've used a whole variety of materials to make artificial limbs in the 20th century. These days, the science has made a great leap forward. Prosthetic hands are now able to do pretty much what a real hand can. This is the ILM prosthetic hand built with individually powered prosthetic digits.
The old generation of electric hands had what I would call, if I can use my hands here, as a pincer grip, where these fingers are pre-flexed so they don't change shape, and the thumb is one shape, and they move like that in one plane.
A claw.
A claw. Whereas what we did was we produced something which rotated about the knuckles that could do this.
Every finger, every thumb can be powered and moved separately, which gives a choice of grips and mimics a real hand.
We've broken through the barrier of making a hand that has to look like a medical device.
The iLim is expensive. Making, fitting and training a hand costs between $60,000 and $100,000. So how easy are they to operate? Sensors are attached to the muscles on my upper arm, just as they would be to an amputee.
Just make exaggerated movements to your wrist. The key is to move through the movement, so one muscle gets tight and then it relaxes.
Goodness me, it's astonishing. I'm beginning to learn how to instruct it.
Almost as important as the greater range of movement is the look.
If you try and shake hands with an amputee who's wearing a prosthesis, it's an awkward moment. But I've noticed that people with the island hand offer the hand. The proud.
It's so seductive, so cool. It features in the latest will.i.am and Britney Spears music video. Donald McKillop lost his right arm in an accident at home 35 years ago. He was one of the first amputees to try an iLim in 2007. How's it changed your life? It's a hand. It's a hand I never thought would have again. You know, actually changes it from the According to Gao, there are about 4,000 iLim users in the world, but the potential market is huge, an estimated 2 million upper limb amputees. Touch Bionics is looking to take its share. Sales are accelerating. 2012 saw turnover reach over $16 million. But for David Gao, it's more than a business.
I've seen hundreds of people, because there's the father that says, thank you, on behalf of his son. And, you know, that means an awful lot. Because you don't, as an engineer, get many moments where you can articulate your human emotions about these things.
We sometimes forget what vital and complex tools our hands are. And one of the great challenges of modern prosthetics, to mimic them. In doing so, the next generation of bionic hands is transforming thousands and thousands of lives.
Just a little excitement for any Britney Spears fans in the audience there. I think the major themes in that interview revolved around the provision of a prosthetic hand which the patient was proud to wear routinely, thus encouraging that person to use it for a wider range of activities. We constantly see that if patients feel less self-conscious, more empowered, confident, and if they've been properly trained, then they wear and use their replacement limb more often, especially when completing normal everyday tasks like holding a cup or using a camera, playing with a ball, or picking up small objects. And it's been exactly that focus on everyday tasks which has been the defining feature of the continued development of the iLim over the last 4 years. So how has this been achieved? Well, I think that some of the tools for productivity that I'm about to describe are the kind of obvious things to do, but that's the point. What we're seeking to do is simplify the use of iLim because the wearers have enough complicated things to deal with already. And that simplification and learning starts before the device has been fitted. This is the VirtuLim, and it's made available to patients before they have a prosthesis fitted. Because practicing how to use the muscles which control the hand and getting used to the BioSim software, the name we give to the software, before actually being fitted, improves familiarity and encourages faster and more permanent adoption. The patient just connects up to their PC and off they go because the VirtuLim is just another Bluetooth device. And all of the control software is available on the PC, can also be provided on an iPod Touch. Tapping favourite grips and features in a couple of seconds allows the iLim wearer much more flexibility in what they can do with the hands, so they could easily pick up a plate in a restaurant or type on a keyboard using an extended index finger. There's many other gestures which you can program in, but I won't put them on the screen. But they're all possible if the wearer so desires. They might just want to tie their shoelace. So because the limitation of the usefulness of an ILM hand is not in the range of movement possible, it's in the wearer's physical ability to control those movements. Now, here are some of the more popular grips. There are actually 14 currently available, and that number is about to become 20. But in practice, the hand can move to any number of digit positions. The iPod and lots of training help. But the new frontier is to come up with ways to provide the brain and the body more ways to actually access and control these features. I'll come back to that theme, but first I wanted to describe a couple of other recent improvements, which are just responses to the wishes of the patients, the wearers, to be more normal. First one's called autograsp, and it's illustrated on the screen. Because the hand doesn't confer a sense of touch to the user, some assistance is required to stop objects which have been grasped and are being held, like a glass, for example, from being dropped accidentally. And this can happen if the user sends an accidental open command to the hand. And that's embarrassing. So if this accidental command occurs, then when autograsp has been activated, then the motors instantly operate, reclosing their fingers around the object. This one's called Very Grip. This was introduced to increase the strength with which the fingers could grip, essentially by providing an extra portion of grip force through each finger, one at a time. Much as we do, again, when we grasp an object, we can form around it, tightening just enough to hold it securely. So by applying the force sequentially to the fingers, the hand can be controlled much more sensitively. More power can be available to each finger, but battery life is actually conserved. So less anxiety about running out of battery, plenty of power, but controlled and applied one digit at a time. And then this one, we spent a lot of time coming up with simple little things to humanize the hand. This is a good example. It's called natural hand. I mean, it just allows the hand to return to its natural position, as you and I would do involuntarily after it's been used, without having to command it to do so. And all that's needed is to set the time delay, and this will happen every time automatically. And then things like flexible wrists. I mean, the wrist is a very useful addendum to our hands, providing us with enormous positional flexibility to grasp and press and point. But most whole hand amputations mean the loss of the wrist. To try and bring back some of that functionality, we supply a flexible mechanical wrist, and also one which is powered and can thus continuously rotate, just like Donald's in the video there. And that's something you and I can't do. These wrists can flex in all directions, and we find that their introduction means that the types of repetitive stress injuries which otherwise occur when the shoulders, for example, are forced into awkward movements to get the hands in the right position, so that's reduced. So far the discussion has all been about the whole hand, but as you may know or guess, whole hand amputation is a lot less common than partial hand loss. ILM digits is for those patients with partial hand loss. It's a very demanding prosthetic challenge with a unique solution for each patient, because every injury is potentially very different from the next. But these images show how much functionality can be restored from workplace or DIY activities to the ubiquitous PlayStation or just the independence of operating a mouse. During and after the fitting of the first 200 or so patients with ILM digits, we received significant feedback which led to a set of criteria for the next iteration of ILM digits. The most visible improvement needed relates to the size of the digits themselves, or more accurately, the distance from their base to the point at which they rotate, distance between those two red lines. That needed to be reduced, first of all, because not all amputations take place at that level, but secondly, so that the rotation point could be different. It has been, as you can see in these diagrams, the new digit shown on the left rotates around a point much closer to the base of the amputation. They look more natural as a result, and it's much easier to get the fingers and thumb to oppose easily. And that's really important, because that's how we pick up objects. It's very important for the thumb and index finger to meet. But we learned other things about partial hand patients. For example, that they wish to have full wrist movement, that they want their partial hand to be lighter and therefore less sweaty. We perspire a lot through our hands. And they want the software to be easier to use, and for the batteries to be easily swappable, so there's no anxiety about running out of power. Because as you can imagine, if you're driving a car, or you're on the tube, and you're left holding onto something, that can be very awkward. And here are the new ILM digits, lighter, smaller, and stronger, with all the software features and manufacturing robustness improvements built in. Controllable with an iPod, and with removable and replaceable batteries. And this is Gary, a young man who suffered a devastating workplace accident about 4 years ago, but who has been transformed from someone who a year ago would not make eye contact and who hid his hand from view, to someone who just a few weeks ago asked us to make him a spare prosthesis coloured bright red. And he loves the freedom his ILM gives him. I mentioned earlier that self-confidence and reduced self-consciousness are key to usage, and this does apply strongly to the cosmetic appearance of ILM. This is often as or more important as how well the hand works, which is the real hand in this image. In 2008, Touch Bionics purchased a company which makes these cosmetic coverings, and we've been developing new covering methods, anti-slip coating to allow the covering to be put on and off easily, as well as more robust and consistent formula for the consistency of the silicone gloves. And the ILM user can therefore be unnoticed in public, just as we all are normally. Well, usually. They usually want to be unnoticed in public. So whilst we're happy to do the Terminator lookalike tattoos, bright red, etc., we nevertheless find that most patients are satisfied with access to over 400 skin colour tones, matched freckles, hairs, and of course paintable nails. So this is a patient with wearing two ILMs with a covering. And very often what will be provided is both an ILM together with a non-movable or passive silicone hand to be worn as the situation dictates. While I was talking about Optos and Mpathy, I mentioned the need to ensure that the product development, as well as being primarily focused on the needs of the patient, did also take into account the needs of the stakeholders, whether they were investors, bankers, or corporate financiers. And this is all also true at Touch. And a further dimension is added by the requirement for outcomes evidence by the funders of these devices, who are most often likely to be an insurance provider or a public health authority. They want to know, how are the patients actually doing? Are they using the hands regularly? Are they able to perform an increased number of everyday functional activities? So having manufactured the hands, another crucial activity for us is to ensure that their use is recorded and measured in order to justify the expense to the payer. And we do this by getting ILM wearers to connect over the internet so that they can report in a consistent, documented manner how they're progressing. When they do that, the hand sends a log of every movement of the hand during that time, enabling a rich bank of data about what features they've been using most often, and also how well the hand is working to be built up. And all of this information is key to justify the expense and provide input for further product development. So to the future, I mentioned earlier that the ILM is capable of doing more than the human body can command it to do. No matter what you hear on TV or in the newspapers, we will never, well not in my lifetime, make something as wonderful as a human hand. Can you imagine how complex the tiny electrical signals are needed to tell my hand to do this? But we can do lots more to address that balance. And here are three contrasting examples of developments at Touch Bionics, each of which has their importance in controlling the hand, in improving dexterity, and in making it easy to switch between the different features so that the dexterity can be accessed. First of all, control. We've discovered that gold plating the electrodes, which carry those tiny electrical signals from the arm muscles to the hand's microprocessor, telling it what to do, improves the reliability and the clarity of those signals enormously. And we've also recognized that lower profile electrodes allow the manufacture of a less obtrusive prosthetic socket. Wearers just want not to be noticed. So these very low profile electrodes are very useful in both function and in improving appearance. Dexterity. I've already mentioned how incredible our hands are. I think I've said that several times. But did you know that 40% of our manual dexterity is estimated to come from our thumb? Until now, it's been very difficult to make thumbs that are electronically rotatable as well as able to open and close. But we have a solution. This means that the wearer can now automatically and precisely use powered rotation of the thumb for those fine motor activities. So, for example, just getting the thumb out of the way to put on or take off clothes, or to carefully pick up small objects between thumb and index finger can now happen with one movement, rather than a movement followed by positioning with the other hand to get that thumb in the right place. It seems unimportant, but if you only had one hand and were carrying a briefcase in it, and then wanted to use your eye-limb to pick up a set of keys, well, you wouldn't want to have to put down the briefcase in order to position your thumb to do that. Finally, ease of use. Thanks to the brilliance of the Apple Corporation, we can pull all the elements together, the responsiveness of electrodes, the choice of grips, all in a simple app, and which will be on the App Store when, Hugh? Thank you. That was 2 days ago. And it will be free to download, but it's really only that useful for you if you've got a prosthetic hand, so don't rush. But just use your iPhone for any setting you wish to adjust. The objective here is to make prosthetic devices a normal feature of our everyday lives, so amputees are comfortable with their adoption, not inhibited or underconfident in using them. And those are things that are coming out right now, imminently, from our engineering group led by Hugh Gill, Chief Technology Officer. We're building on the key invention, prosthetic digits, which are independently articulating, robust and strong, and trying to get them used as easily and unobtrusively as possible, because that's what the users demand. Before I finish, I'd like to mention some key development areas that are the next frontier for upper limb prosthetics. What if surgeons could reposition nerves in active muscle? Then the body could think it was moving a real hand, and that information could be relayed to the eye-limb. Well, this work is underway in various research locations around the world by external organisations to us, and we hope that the results will eventually be accessible by eye-limb wearers. We ourselves are working and collaborating with leading Scottish universities in the areas of pattern recognition and gyroscopic control to explain if microprocessors and software could together interpret certain signals from the electrodes and or related physical movements and gestures as unique to certain grips or features or positions of the hand, then it could be programmed to respond accordingly. Think of a very advanced Wii, and you've got the general idea. And of course, we would like to get closer to the original intent of this whole project, to make a smaller hand, probably not suitable for very young children, but certainly aimed at high school students or people of, for example, Asian race. This is about 3 years away from being in production. With the smaller digits, neater electrodes, and smaller PCBs, this is perfectly possible. I couldn't be more enthusiastic about the future course of these developments. We're motivated not only by our founder's vision, but also by witnessing the hardships overcome by amazing people who restore their functions, not fully, but really very significantly. Sigmund Freud said in his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, I'm sure you've all read it, published in 1929, he said, man has, as it were, become a kind of prosthetic god. When he puts on all his auxiliary organs, he is truly magnificent. But those organs have not grown onto him, and they still give him much trouble at times. Well, I'm not sure about the prosthetic god statement, but the last two sentences could quite neatly describe some of our ambitions at Touch Bionics. Firstly, raise the self-esteem of the wearer, make them feel magnificent. We all deserve the chance to feel good about ourselves, don't we? And at the same time, whilst recognising the limitations of a prosthesis, the trouble that it can give, nevertheless seek to minimise those limitations by wringing every bit of utility from the eye-limb, by training, by making it easy to use, by making its movements mechanically better. And here's why my colleagues get up in the morning and bounce into work. Look at this young man. Patrick Kane was severely affected by meningitis when he was just a few years old. But he ran on his prosthetic legs, carried the Olympic torch, and proudly held his arms aloft in Trafalgar Square on the day before the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in London last year. And we mustn't deny him or others the opportunity to fully participate. Patrick is empowered by his own resolve, he's a great guy, and also by the devices which assist him. And this is a big motivation to us all at Touch Bionics to try and bring forward further engineering advances. Here's my final video. It's a good example of someone overcoming hardship with positivity and a pair of eye limbs. Here is Jason Kruger's story.
Your news and information leader. Tennessee's first local news in high definition. This is News Channel 5 at 6.
Thanks, Ron. Hawaii Five-0, one of the most popular shows on TV, and tonight there's even more reason for you to watch.
Jason Koger nearly died when his ATV hit a live power line. He lost both arms below his elbow, and that made the Kentucky native a perfect fit for a role in tonight's Hawaii Five-0 episode. He spent 2 weeks in paradise filming. And as News Channel 5's Nick Barris tells us, there's much more to Koger's story than just a quick brush with Hollywood.
Hawaii Five-0 is known for its action-packed drama, but you'd be hard-pressed to top Jason Koger's real-life story. While riding his ATV 5 years ago, he collided with a power line.
I just ran into it, and that took 7,200 volts.
Koger spent 3 days in a coma and awoke to find doctors had to amputate both his arms just below the elbow. So there he was, 30 years old, a family with small children, and no hands.
I knew God would give me the strength to get through it.
Koger took it as a challenge. Initially fitted with prosthetic hooks, he was still able to play with his children. He couldn't afford the best, but the artificial hands he had worked. Just a few months after the accident, Koger even went skydiving.
So you do it again, Jason? Yeah, agreed.
No hands, no problem. And in a twist you only find in Hollywood, Koger landed the role of a lifetime. A casting agent was looking for
a bilateral amputee, a white male, my age.
Koger was the perfect fit for the role. You see him here posing with the stars of Hawaii Five-0. Koger joined the cast for 2 weeks in paradise, shooting an episode which airs tonight.
It's bang bang time.
I go to Hawaii knowing that I'm a double for Peter Weller, which is RoboCop. And so I go, and basically I'm his hands, or, you know, my hand's his face.
Oh, so retro.
Tonight's show is a remake of a 5-0 episode from 1973. For Koger, the shoot was a blast. And there's more. The cast and crew saw that Koger used an older pair of prosthetics. Problem is, new state-of-the-art bionic hands cost $170,000. So the Hawaii Five-0 crew asked the makers, Advanced Arm Dynamics and Touch Bionics, if they'd consider donating a pair to Koger, telling them...
He just did a show that 10 million people's going to watch. And they never missed a beat. They said, absolutely. So.
After the shoot in Hawaii, Koger went to Dallas for his new hands. And now, finally back home, it's like show and tell with his kids.
Hey, well, come here and get your nose pinched.
Koger's new hands can do most everything human hands can, and even a few things they can't.
You want to see something really crazy?
His kids think that's cool, but it's the simple things these hands can do that Koger appreciates most.
It means a lot to me to just to be able to look down and see that.
The hands were given to him. But the gift is really for his whole family.
So you still can't feel, but I love holding my kids' hands.
Nick Barris, News Channel 5 HD.
That's fantastic. Koger lives with his family in Kentucky, and sometimes...
That's fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have had the opportunity to speak to you this evening. And I'd like to thank the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the Royal Academy of Engineering for their very kind invitation. I'm also very privileged to have had the opportunity to work with these great inventions. I applaud the founders and chairman of Optos, Mpathy and Touch Bionics for their vision and leadership. It's especially nice to see Douglas and David here this evening, and also Douglas's son Leif, along with Barry Seeley, my chairman at Optos, and George Borthwick, chairman at First Mpathy and now Touch Bionics. And I know that for all these inventions, there's a lot more to be done. Of course there is. The users demand it. It's Rena. And finally, here are some island wearers enjoying themselves. Cheers. Thank you so much for your attention.
Just while Ian is sitting down, perhaps having a well-earned glass of water, I'm sure we're going to have a really, really interesting discussion about how these diagnostic and prosthetic devices have been devised, Scottish expertise in doing that, the implications for people across the world, and what the limits and developments might be in the future. And all of that we can discuss. And he's a very well-organised man. He has produced the version of his talk, which will go on our website tomorrow. Usually I have to wait for a week or 2 weeks before we get to that stage, but you have done the smart thing again, Ian, and we get it tomorrow. So that's what's ahead of us. And now let's have a discussion.
And I've also got David Gowes here, Douglas Anderson's here, founders of Touch and Optos, and also Hugh Gill, Chief Technology Officer. If that's on the off chance that one of the questions goes beyond my engineering knowledge.
I think we should actually ask these three gentlemen to stand up, because these are remarkable inventions. 3. Okay, so who would like to start the questions? Yes, at the back. And there is a microphone, and please make the question as short as you can. Thank you.
Okay, there was a report in the news a few weeks ago that a man in West Yorkshire had had a hand transplant. Do you think the hand transplantation in the future might provide competition or even make the eye limb redundant?
I'd like to think that that would be the case, really. I think that at this stage, my knowledge on the subject is that hand transplants are very experimental. They do mean that the patient is going to be on very severe drug doses for the rest of their life, and there's an unknown life expectancy reduction as a result of that. So, clearly it's very desirable for someone to have a human hand attached to them again, but there are many, many considerations. So, as somebody running a business selling prosthetic hands, we'd like to provide an alternative to that. It's early days with hand transplants.
Next question. Yes, on that side.
How are those hands powered? You mentioned that they are powered by batteries. How strong, how big?
They're powered by lithium batteries. Actually, it's mobile phone technology, which has been the major, if you like, contributory factor to the batteries. We've got, I think it's 2,400 milliamp hours, 7 volts. 1,300 and 2,400. So they can operate for about 7 or 8 hours.
Well, I was wondering if you have considered wireless power from the body itself as you move the mechanical movement of the other part of the body. You can then power.
Have we considered that, Hugh?
Yes, we have considered that at present we need between 4 and 5 amps of current to drive the hand. So scavenging power like that at the moment is just like a little trickle charge, and it doesn't help the patient. But in the future those things will change and they will be beneficial, but at this stage we can't get enough power out of it.
Could I ask, how do you get the controlled signals to operate these hands?
We attach electrodes to the muscles, to the surface of the skin, and they pick up little tiny electrical signals from the muscles. And those signals are then transmitted to the microprocessor in the hand.
But these signals must be voluntarily induced by the person.
Like in the video when David had the presenter moving the muscles top and bottom, and they were sending signals to the hand, and the hand responds accordingly. So you can send, stop, go, harder, faster, and you can send double signals, triple signals, really a code to the hand to make it operate.
And how much training is necessary?
Well, training is a key component. So we find that if someone's been well trained beforehand, so this is why we have virtual limb, and then at the time of fitting, that they're going to perform so much better. Because, what I've seen is getting a prosthetic hand is a major event. in its own right. So then being able to learn how to control it as well. So training and therapy at the time of fitting, before fitting and afterwards is really crucial to the success factor.
Right, next question. Yes, Ian. Hold it, wait for the microphone, Ian.
I mean, Richie, I'm actually the honorary treasurer of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and I was on the McRobert committee about 5 years ago when we awarded you the McRobert Award, so it was very good to see that. I guess one of the big issues, though, must be that you mentioned the price, and the price is very hefty. So what hope is there for cost reduction, and a more economic delivery? Because that obviously would mean your market would go up, I guess.
Yeah. There is opportunity for cost reduction. It's not, as you might imagine, the market for amputation or for prosthetic hands is limited. But at the moment we're fitting hundreds per year. If we were fitting thousands per year, then I think the costs would come down, both at manufacturer and in the support organisation needed to actually make sure that the training and everything was there with it. So yeah, we've certainly got ambitions to do that.
Next question in the centre and then one at the back. Can you see it? Right. Thank you.
Jim Norton, Royal Academy of Engineering. Do you plan to close the feedback loop to fit the iLim with strain sensing technology or something like that to give a feedback to the user and refine the motor control further?
Hugh?
Would you like to start that again?
So I'll start again. So we have intellectual property using vibratory feedback. So basically, when the hand's closing, we can sense the pressure and force, and then feedback is given back to the patient's skin through micromotors which vibrate, and each of those vibrations vary in terms of feedback for grip, or there could be 6 of them, so it sort of moves up a sort of different level of vibratory force, so that's vibration feedback. And there's other techniques as well, but that's one of them.
Yes, the one at the back, yes.
For the first two of your inventions, or the inventions you're working with, you've had to go to the States to get it developed.
Yes.
What can we do in the UK to get such development to be progressed here rather than overseas?
Well, if we had 300 million people who spent as much on their healthcare as the Americans do, that would be a start. And that is a significant factor.
It's a very serious issue.
That is a significant factor. Each of these technologies has had to go to America because the environment to get new companies funded within the NHS, either in Scotland or in England, is really very difficult. It's risky. You could put a lot of effort into trying to get adoption within the NHS and fail. And of course, a young business just can't afford to do that. Its investors are not going to take that risk. So certainly having funds ring-fenced for the adoption of these sort of technologies, and I mean ring-fenced, I don't just mean that the government announced something and then it doesn't happen or the funds get used for something else. That would be very helpful because, we've had to receive all of our feedback from America, really. I had to go and live there, which was fine, but it's not as close a loop, and it just is a pity that UK Scottish companies can't make a big impact in their own home market. No, I better stop it. No, nobody's ever been fitted with a prosthetic hand funded by the Scottish NHS, but we're working on it.
Is there anybody here from the enterprise community who would like to comment on that? Or from the NHS or from Scottish Development? Ian, would you want to comment on that? Could you supply the microphone down here? Because this is a very, very important issue.
No, it's extraordinarily difficult for medical technology companies. I was chairman of Voxar, which was a medical imaging company. And I remember the day the chief executive told me there were more medical scanners in the city of Houston than there were in the whole of Scotland. So the US has just got a much more developed medical system, and they're willing to buy things, and they're willing to buy innovation. I mean, a lot of your sales go to army, to people who've lost limbs in battle.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, there's support for that type of thing in the States. But as you say, it's tragic that there's no effective. Nobody in the NHS will buy this kit.
Yeah, I mean, that's from the adoption point of view. But as I said at the start, I mean, there are 300 million people in America. There are more people living in Houston than there are living in Scotland. So it's not a bad place to go to market.
George Borthwick, Chairman of Touch. I think we need to appreciate, though, although we develop the product here, we see the States as our biggest single market. So we go in there very quickly and very aggressively. But we also product differentiate. That's absolutely vital. But we don't leave, quite frankly, the rest of the world alone. I mean, we're already in Europe, we're in the UK, we're in France, we're in Germany, we're in Italy. Ian and his merry team are just back from India, and he's just back from China. So it's not a question of just looking at the States and saying the States happens. It's the same also when we did the business with Mpathy. So we've got to be very careful that we're not just simply saying that it's just the UK barriers. We've been helped quite significantly with the core funding. I think what is important, though, is that how do you actually develop a business for the long term? And that, I think, is a challenge that we've got to face. In other words, as we look at Scotland, we're not going to be able to manufacture products that are, quite frankly, just simply Me Too's. We've got to be at the high end of engineering. We've got to be at the high end of technology. And that's what we're doing with Touch. And what we're thinking of, as you heard from Hugh, we're already looking 3 and 5 years ahead as to what exactly is to happen and how these markets will be developed. So I don't want us to think that because we can't penetrate the UK and the States is the only option, we're looking at an international business and trying to grow a business here, and a business that is truly global in its perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and Optos is operating in many countries around the world. Mpathy just made a decision to go to America because that's where the competitors were. But Optos and Touch have both got global possibilities.
I think we've got more to do in Scotland, a lot more to do. Right, next question. Anyone? Yes, on that side.
Thanks. Great product. But I'm sure with and you just touched on the competition, I'm sure with the fallout from the Afghan war and the Iraq war, the Americans are throwing a great deal of effort at this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a bit about the effects of competition on what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of money being invested in prosthetic hands and arms. It's called DARPA. Probably $100 to $200 million has been thrown into that over the last 7 or 8 years. I think that the advantage that Touch has is that we have a product on the market. We've been through all the manufacturing difficulties. Even though it's expensive, we're able to manufacture it for a fraction of the cost that the hand, or I think there's only been 2 or 3 ever actually come out of that research work. So I think we've got a substantial lead, and we've tried to make it really practical. But I think generally it's good to have the competition. The other large group looking into prosthetic hands is Ottobock, which is the world's largest prosthetic company. And they followed Touch into the market with a multi-articulating hand, which is great because it raises the awareness. The biggest competition for us is not other multi-articulating hands. It's patients who don't have any device. They have a body-powered device. They just have a passive device, or they have one of the really old sort of gripper things that we were seeing in the videos. So there's plenty to go for, and I think it's good to have all this interest in the multi-articulating side. It'll just drive the whole thing forward.
Yes, in the centre towards the back.
I was the first of Ian's chairman that he referred to, but I want to make clear, because I think there was some slight misunderstanding in some of the coming out of the questions. All of these 3 products have been developed and continue to be developed in Scotland. The issue about the United States is about the market. So I just want to make it clear, it is Scottish products and developed in Scotland and financed in Scotland, not financed anywhere else. So I think just want people to understand that quite clearly.
Do you want to comment on that?
Well, that's absolutely true. Right. Good. That's absolutely true.
Most of the questions so far have related to Bionic. Can I come to Optos? First of all, can I congratulate Douglas Anderson and his team for the tremendous work that they've done, and indeed Douglas has been quite inspirational going out to talk to primary school kids recently, which is fantastic. Can I ask the question, Optos equipment, is there any sign of it being used in, say, the African continent where there seems to be a lot of difficulties with eye problems?
Yeah.
I'll pass that one to Douglas because I left Optos 6 years ago.
Could we have the microphone down, please?
I regret not yet. We do. It's a sophisticated device, and it does require a lot of technical support. We have had a lot of inquiries in the last couple of years from South Africa, and I think that will probably be the first country in Africa to receive devices. We have fairly recently supplied to India, Southeast Asia, a lot of devices going to Australia, huge market for us coming in South America, particularly Brazil. Our business model, of course, is quite capital intensive, and so we've had to vary that to go to some of the markets, and setting up a local infrastructure and doing the pay-as-you-go business model is very complex and very, as I said, capital intensive. So it's just not possible for us to go to as many countries as we would like. So we have more recently started bringing on board agents, but they have to be quite sophisticated, and that selection process and training process does take time. But I think we're now probably in about 20 or 30 countries, which is a big step forward from when I came a few years ago and talked to the societies.
There's another hand went up there. Yeah, sorry, here we are.
How critical was Scottish government money in bringing these developments to the market? And do you think Scottish enterprise could do more to help getting these sub-products out?
Well, for both Mpathy and for Touch Bionics, a lot of the funding has come from the Scottish Co-Investment Fund or associated funds, and that's been really, really useful because Archangel has been able to lead the investment and then have matched funding from Scottish enterprise. And frankly, without that, I don't think either of those companies would be here.
Make or break.
Well, it was just very, very useful to have that funding. Optos didn't have that luxury, though that sort of funding wasn't available, so it relied on the Archangel investors and Amadeus Capital Partners who came in and supported. I guess they kind of provided the role of the Scottish Co-Investment Fund equivalent in Optos.
We did get smart terminal.
We got smart funding, yeah, that's true.
Regional selective assistance, which was very important.
Yeah. So, I mean, Scottish enterprise is extremely important, extremely helpful, and I hope these funds stick around because they really develop business as well. I mean, there's lots of businesses using them. And they've been responsible for the growth of the Business Angel network, for a big factor in the growth of the Business Angel network in Scotland, which is extremely strong.
I think we'll take 3 or 4 more questions before we allow you to go. Who's next? Yes, up on the right-hand side.
There was mention earlier of new developments and intellectual property, and I was wondering if you could say something about the role of intellectual property in each of the businesses.
It's vital.
Well, the core intellectual property was absolutely vital in the invention itself in each of the 3 businesses. So the businesses could not possibly have happened unless those things had been invented. Now, in terms of value creation, that's another thing. And there it was extremely important as well. There's absolutely no way that especially Mpathy Medical would ever have been sold if it didn't have very strong intellectual property. And I think we'll find the same applies to Touch Bionics. With Optos, I loved the invention. I just don't think anybody could ever have copied it. It was such an elegant invention. Complete, you know, the prior art had a spherical mirror, and the invention was an ellipsoidal mirror. A bit difficult to copy that, so it was really important. And of course, for any young business, making sure that the IP is defensible is going to be important, because whatever route they go to deal with competitors, to sell, they're going to need to be pretty tight in that respect. So it was pretty important.
Yes, I think this will be the last question at the back.
Yeah, hi, my name is Alexander Finlayson. I'm a medic from Scotland, but I actually work down in Oxford. Something I've very much noticed is there's, in the medical community, lots of good ideas at the coalface, but people are kind of hammering themselves on hard rotas on the wards. And one of the problems we've had is kind of meeting engineers, for example. We tried to create a cross-disciplinary group in Oxford for that. But another big problem is people at the coalface coming up with ideas, meeting people like you. And I wonder if you could comment about how we could try to systematize that process a bit better, because I feel that that's, for me, one of the biggest things that would unlock a lot of potential in terms of innovation within the health service.
I'm probably not the best qualified to answer this one, but what I will say is that I think maybe the issue is more with respect to the hold that the universities and the hospitals have over what is actually being invented. So it therefore becomes a little difficult to get those inventions out of the universities and the hospitals. But I think that's an issue for government to try and change that, issue for the universities as well.
My conclusion about that is that the potential, as you know, as the biomedical people, the bioengineers in this audience will well know, and the molecular and medical applications are being developed here at a very, with tremendous skill, great potential. We have really, really good medical science in the UK and Scotland as well. And it's a case of how best to harness that, to work with the engineering community and to develop, because what has been developed is using very small signals generated by nerves and muscles to articulate this artificial hand. And that's just one application that I can imagine. So there is a generation of things to be invented and developed, and that's, I think, an exciting point at which to pass over to Ian Anderson himself. Douglas Anderson. Yes, he's changed his name since I last met. Douglas Anderson himself, to give us a vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Well, I hope you agree it's been a very entertaining evening, as well as an interesting one. I've known Ian for a great many years and worked with him for almost 10. I think we had a really great working relationship. It's often intense discussion, argument, but always with the mission in mind. We never deviated from that. So it's a real pleasure to thank him for taking us on such a tour de force this evening. It really has been splendid. Ian's pioneering of new business, building 3 substantial businesses in the biggest medical market in the world, namely the US and beyond now with Touch, is really not to be underestimated. That the sheer scale of that challenge. His legacy of endeavour, as presented in the lecture this evening, has showed us the essentials. The essential of ambition to go where markets are open, for their courage, and this is more perhaps implied and gone through in detail, to recruit on an intimidating scale sales teams in remote places, for the creativity and resourcefulness needed to compete against giants, and for the lifeblood that comes only from sustained support of investors prepared to make positive decisions when others won't. And I know that Ian would wish me to acknowledge that his success and that the success of all companies, including my own, owe everything to the enduring support of Archangel, that die-hard group of local investors that have done so much over the past 20 years for emerging high-tech businesses in Scotland. So we jointly thank them. Ian pointed up so many lessons, explicit and implied, that are not merely fascinating, but important exemplars, vital to the recovery of the Scottish economy. He well explained building a business infrastructure in the US, at the heart its challenge, building the sales force 3,000 miles away to address a market 100 times the size of our own. It's a huge endeavour that takes energy and perseverance and the commitment of more money than any small company would ever wish to spend. Difficult, but as Ian has shown us in 3 examples, far from impossible if the nettle is grasped, if the innovation genuinely has real advantage, and that's what we saw this evening. There's a powerful competitive advantage in each of these technologies. There's no point in going out with an extra 5% of performance if you're a small business. There has to be real substance there. But if one does have that commitment and one does have that advantage, success really does await those bold enough to try. It is so important that early stage medtech companies in particular in Scotland do learn to explore overseas, not least because, as has been discussed in some part, very regrettably there is no home market for innovative healthcare technology in Scotland, and nor will there be one for many years to come. Ian was at the very core of the business success of Optos and that of Mpathy, and is today in respect of Touch. These 3 successful international technologies, they're there where they might not have been. There could easily have been none had we focused, had Ian focused, had we not had the momentum to go overseas, and had we not had Ian leading with such power and commitment. So we thank you, Ian, for the lecture this evening and entertaining us while demonstrating these essentials of success and ultimately making it possible to deliver these 3 great Scottish innovations to the wider world for the betterment of patient care. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Douglas, for these very wise words. They're not bad for a second row forward.
Thank you very much.